Hi, today my guest is someone who I've known for just a few months, but I felt like I've known her all my life. Someone who has highly impacted me in a lot of different ways. I saw her in an interview that one of my mentors, Randy Gage, did maybe almost 3 months ago. Then I started following her on YouTube and seeing, and then she just published her a book. And her name is Victoria Labalme. She is the founder of Risk Forward and Rock the Room, designed to help people express their hidden genius. Her strategies have been embraced by over 700 organizations, entrepreneurs, senior executives, and hundreds of thousands of individuals around the world. As a performing artist and member of the Speaker Hall of Fame, Victoria shares her messages through keynote performances, workshops, private consulting, and online learning. You can find her at www.victorialabalme.com. Okay, so welcome, Victoria, and it's a pleasure for me to having the opportunity to speak to you and to talk about your new book and talk a little bit about your work. For people who don't know you, who is Victoria, and how would you say that Risk Forward is a reflection of who she is or where she is right now?
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And as you know, my name is Victoria Labalme. I work with individuals and organizations to help them express their original ideas the way that only they can. And that's with the unexpected twist that makes it their own, that distinguishes their work. And I help people, whether it's in one-on-one communications, on video, in presentations, on camera, on stage, and with Risk Forward in life and work.
Perfect. I want to start this conversation because obviously I was a music critic for many, many years. And when I see your affinity towards the arts and, in acting and all that, so obviously it was drawn to me. And I want to start this conversation because in a lot of the videos that I've seen about you, you always talk about the through line that as individuals we have. And I want to make a reference to two conversations I heard of two people that I admire a lot. A couple of years ago, I saw an interview that Robert Downey Jr. did in the Joe Rogan Experience. And when he was starting his career, he says that one of the biggest lessons he learned, it was by Warren Beatty. Warren Beatty, while he was filming, I can't remember, one of his first movies, he walks into the scene because Warren Beatty was one of the executive producers, and he tells him, "What is your action?" And Robert Downey Jr. in that moment couldn't answer the question. And he says, "Well, I got to do this." And he says, "No, I'm not asking you what is the scene about. What is your action?" So he had to think about it, really mull over it. Then he came back and said, "Okay, I got to walk into the room. I just got to stop. I got to look at this person and I got to project this emotion." He says, "That's it." And ever since that moment, Robert says, "I've always been clear on what is my action in life, in a scene, and what I got to do." Then another conversation I saw, I'd say maybe close to a year ago, Dave Chappelle, who's a genius in terms of comedy, and I'd say he's a philosopher more than a comedian. He says he was talking about all of this situation, why he stepped away from the business for 12 years. And he says, I've been good at one thing, knowing what is my business. And my business is not common, is knowing what am I good at and sticking to that and always speaking to that. And that's why I wanted to bring those two, because it's like two polars and you're like in the middle, because in a lot of your videos, you're always talking about the through line. You make obviously the analogy of where you picked it up from Stanislavski. Yeah, I don't know if I pronounced.
Stanislavski.
Yes, this Russian that has had a lot to do with the arts and how that force that moves you through life. And to me, it was like, well, they're talking of two opposites. You're talking about the middle. Talk to me a little bit about the through line that's so common that you speak about it in a lot of the videos and a lot of material I see about you
Okay,
online.
sure. Well, I should back up by saying that I come from a background in the performing arts. So I spent 20 years in the arts as a performer, as a writer, as a producer, as a director, a comedian. And what I've done over these last many, many years is I've applied principles from the performing arts to business and life to help entrepreneurs, executives, healers, consultants, creatives, scientists, students really, as I said earlier, express themselves. And there are two brands to my business. One of them is Rock the Room, which is how to rock it on stage, on camera. And one of them is this new book, Risk Forward. And that is all about unlocking your hidden genius. In both Rock the Room, the program for on stage, on camera, on Zoom and webinars, and in Risk Forward, I talk about the through line. And that is, as you noted, coming from originally Stanislavski. Not everyone knows that. People think that they just came up with the term or that it's in the air. I've been talking about it for 2 decades. And it is really this driving force that drives a character. So when we work in Rock the Room, one of the things that we do is we look at the force that drives the character, in this case, you, the speaker, through your life, but then how is that broken down in any given scene? And a scene could be you on camera, it could be you greeting your team in a meeting live or virtually, and we're looking at that piece of that larger arc, that larger through line to your life. And in any given scene, there are different moments, what in acting is called a beat. And so we look very carefully, and what I do is I help people go from being like, hello, my name is John, I'm on camera and I want to welcome you, to really thinking, what's the first beat? The first beat is to welcome. Hey there, I'm John, I wanted to welcome you, right? So we're looking at the micro verbs for any given moment. There's a whole strategy behind that. It's the Rock the Room is a 5-module piece, and that's just one little segment of the first module, which is all around the through line. The first module is called the through line, and there are a series of videos and tutorials that go with that. The same thing in Risk Forward. It's a question I ask early on in the book and in the programs that I have that go with it. We do VIPs, we do workshops, we have an online course. And so it's really about how can you reconnect with that larger force in your work, in your life, and apply that in your everyday settings. And it's transformational. I work with teams, I work with leaders, and people's eyes open up because it's so practical and it is a game changer.
One thing that I love about Risk Forward, and I've read a lot of books about creativity and about how to ignite yourself and how to really like motor and get through and really, or the why or the purposefulness. One thing that really strikes me and I really enjoyed about reading Risk Forward and working it, because I've been working it also, I've downloaded all the PDFs and worked it, is that your book, more than telling people what to do or how to do it, and looking at your work online, more than being a method or a system, is very autoreferential. You're making references to a lot of what you've been speaking to and talking about for many, many years. I heard in your interview with Randy Gage you did maybe around 3 months ago, that you had 3 books that you were considering to write at the moment when you were offered or you had the opportunity to write a book. And that this was one, maybe the most challenging one, but because you had to go, and when reading the book, you went through confusion and you went through a lot of different stages. But what I really love is how do you reference your own work and what you're giving to people, not like a method, but it's like guiding, I don't know, lanes or channels. What can you speak about that?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I want to clarify for anyone listening and watching that it's not that the work is self-referential in that you don't understand it. It's really more that what I found is that the best way to help people is to help them find their own answers. So Rock the Room and Risk Forward and my keynotes and my workshops are all designed to prompt the audience, the participant, to do their best work on their own terms. And that's what makes it so transformational. I don't say do it this way. I say, here's some guidelines and principles, and people light up because they say, oh, I can apply my own personality, my past to this. And the only reason I think you may be saying, oh, they're self-referential is that there are terms that show up in a few of them, like the through line or the concept of the prism. But there's a lot of disparate. I mean, I'd say 80% of what's in this book is not elsewhere.
Oh, no, right? Absolutely. Oh,
there's
no.
just, it's like a Venn diagram. And there's just a little overlap because they all tie together. It's like an integrated product suite. So people who go through Risk Forward go through Rock the Room. People go through Rock the Room, go through Risk Forward. They go to the through line, and they're all working together. And people like that. As someone who's learning, it's comforting to say, oh, I remember this piece. It gives them a foothold. And they start to see that there's integrity and congruence across all these methodologies. Because the theme behind everything I do is helping people express themselves the way they can, and not like anyone else. And that's what we all want. We're in the age of expression, as I call it. This is the age of expression, I've termed it. So
one thing that since I started learning about your work and about you in this book in particular, it's spoken to about a lot of my life. I look at my life and I've been a risk forward. I pretty much in everything I've done. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and I didn't want to get in debt and college loans and all this. And I walked away from college, and I, out of nowhere, I got a job in a music store, which I didn't know about. I started working. Then out of nowhere, without any preparation, I was offered to become a journalist. I started writing for a newspaper. 8 months later, I was covering Michael Jackson and the Grammys. Never would have thought that. But when my life took another detour, when I came into the coaching, into the training, pretty much I do a lot of transformational work. You've heard maybe about Landmark, Insight, Lifespring, all of these companies that pretty much started in the 70s in the US. And one of the concepts that as trainers we learn is how to be in and with the question. And one thing that I see a lot about risk forward is that it's okay to be confused. It's okay to be in moments where there could be angst. It's okay to be in that moment, and you don't have to try to overcome it or deny it or fight it. It's okay. What can you say about, because to me it's a point of like the law of least resistance in what you're saying in some degree. What can you speak about that?
yeah, well, one of the misconceptions people have about risk forward is that they think that what I'm telling people is to just hang out always in confusion. And what I'm really saying instead is that for everyone from top CEOs, and I've worked with companies like Starbucks, Microsoft, PayPal, New York Life Insurance, the extraordinary leaders, teams, entrepreneurs who are appearing on Oprah's stage or on TED or PBS. I've worked with Hollywood leaders of all kinds. What I've discovered is that the best of them, just like any of us, right? They go through periods of not knowing, and it's how they handle that gap between being clear and not being clear, or not being clear and clear, that is a make or break moment. Because we are taught in our society that that's a bad thing. And so people immediately try to jump out of it as quickly as they can. They marry the most convenient person because they don't want to look like they don't know. They make the quickest decision because they're told that a leader makes good, quick decisions. But how good is a decision if it's made quickly and it's a poor one, right? So that's not great. The best leaders I know, they carefully consider the facts. They make informed decisions. When they don't know, they say they don't know. They don't bluff. And so really what the book is saying is when you're in that in-between period, whether it's for minutes, as you're facing the blog blank screen and you're trying to figure out what your blog post is, you're facing the chapter of your new book, or you're facing how to handle a client, or whether to speak up in a conversation, or whether to choose one project or another, or which pivot you want to make with your career. These happen in minutes, they happen in weeks, they happen in months. And these periods of that looking for your next best step, that should not be rushed through, because that is a fertile moment and it's full of promise. And if we can make a good choice within that window, which is what I call the fog of not knowing, when you're in that fog and you have opportunity, rather than make the quickest, fastest, most convenient decision, what you want to do is go through the book, and the book prompts you, the reader, with questions. And people are buying the books for their teams. I had a scientist say, we're buying this for the whole team. This is our new playbook, because science is all about not knowing. Good science at the cutting edge. It's about going into the unknown. I have parents saying, I'm buying the books for all my graduating, my daughter who's graduating from college and all her friends, because they're all in that not knowing. I have people who are going through divorce or a health crisis who are getting the book because they're in that not knowing. I have a woman who's a multi-million-dollar business, and she said the book saved her $5 million because she was about to make the most convenient decision. And she said, wait a second. I'm going to embrace this fog, as it says, and I'm going to make a wise decision. And it took a few extra days. In fact, maybe 2 extra weeks. but it saved her $5 million. So there you go. The book is valuable whether you're a student, a senior, a CEO, a consultant. It's across the board, and it's written very spare. So by the way, I want to say this. If anyone's listening to this and they are expecting a text-heavy, dense, step-by-step, case study rich, really heavy workbook, this is not that book. What this book is, I spent months, 18 months, pulling content out and rewriting every sentence so that it is as crystal and simple as it could be for you, the reader, to save you time, to give you the best of the best, and to make it fun and easy. And on that note, I'm just going to pause here and show people what it looks like, because people don't know. This is what it looks like inside. It's visual. It's fun. Every page is different. Each page is an experience, and you can read the book in any order. Each chapter is 1/2 page to 2 pages. So it's fun. It's a guidebook, and you can come back to it again and again in your life.
One thing that I really also, in an interview you did with Frank Oz when you launched the book, he talks about that the book is very simple, that he would have loved to read it when he was beginning, even when he was already working in the Muppets and all that, how it would have illustrated him different moments of time where he struggled with self-esteem and all that. And I think that one of the things that the book has is that it's very simple, it's very illustrative, it's very, plus all the online resources you give the readers to really add on to it, make it very simple, but it's also very visually comforting. You know, it's something that I look at it and I see the little robots and I see all the little illustration. It's like, it brings out the child in you. It brings out the creative, the imagination,
Yes.
So many different aspects about it.
Yes.
And I go, you know, this is a book that it's not about if you read it, it's how are you using it?
Right.
More than reading it. How
Right.
are you using it?
Right. I mean, how many books do we each get that we don't finish because they're just too heavy and thick? And I designed this book to be a book that people would finish, and that's for the reason we have the online sources. So we have resources online people can get if they want more. But this book is very slim, and it was designed to be delightful. Those little, you call them robots, the characters as I call them, you know, they are there for whimsy, for delight. They add another perspective, and they, as you said, they bring comfort. People say the book feels like a hug, because at our core, for us to do our best work, we have to feel like relaxed, at peace, excited. We can't feel freaked out. That's not a place from which we do our best work. And there are a lot of leaders and a lot of books that are written to make you feel worse about yourself. And they pretend to be self-help books or business development books, which this is. This is part business development, part personal development. So we're on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list at number 4. So it's partly a business book, but it's also a personal development book. And one of the things that people are finding is like they can relax. They say, I have permission. I feel liberated. And they're excited now to trust themselves and to do their creative work. And this has tons of ideas for how to do that.
You don't mention this in the book. You mention one part of it when you make the distinction of the clock of angst and the clock of calm, which I'm going to come back to it a little bit further in the interview, further ahead. But there's something you don't mention, which I think sometimes, at least looking at it from a personal standpoint or a creative standpoint, you don't mention the word neurosis in the book. But sometimes when you're in that process of gestation, of something's coming to birth, what would you say about neurosis sometimes in the creative process in a human being, and when they're stuck and when they're thinking of the fog or what's there? What can you speak about that in that process for any person?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded term, neurosis. You know, it has a lot of negative connotations. So I specifically did not use that. I think when we do care about doing good work, we do get a little mindful, and there's sometimes a little worry. There's a wonderful quotation that was in the book, which I did pull out, but I used it in a lot of my keynotes, and I use it when I teach Rock the Room, and that is from one of my mentors, the great French mime, Marcel Marceau. And he used to say, the amateur is always pleased with themselves, but the professional is toujours inquiète, is always worried because their life depends on what they do. And when you're a professional, and I said this in the interview that you watched, when you come off the stage or you walk out of a meeting, you're thinking, how could I have done that better? And that's the sign of a professional, because you're always looking to improve. Now, when you go into a spiral and you're in that complete pressure cooker of, your word, neurosis, that's not the most productive place to be. But kind of looking and thinking, how can I do this better? What would be better? And reevaluating and self-critiquing, that's, I think, a positive sign.
Perfect. Now, your background, artistic background in wanting to be an actress, and I love when you describe the scene of when you were part of Sex and the City and how initially you went through it and it came out very naturally. And then when you had the time to think it over, and then when you had to do it in the time, I don't want to give it away, but you know, when I hear you a lot, I'm always thinking of how for you, it's like always about coming from within, coming from within, coming from within. And and when you talk about the 4 questions in the book, it's like an invitation of, it's okay. Let's take a little deep inside and see what's there. Let's talk a little bit about coming from within, because when you said, wait, I could talk to the corporate world about going within and about looking at the artistry, I think that it's really inviting the corporate world to say, let's look within. Let's not look at what's out there. Let's look at what's in here and what's going on inside of us and inside of this boardroom, and what do we want to have an impact out there. So what can you say about that in the 4 questions you talk about in the artist aspect of it?
Yeah. Well, there are 2 pieces to it. There's the within, and then there's the effect. And the part that's not in there that I'm speaking about by eliminating it is the without. Like when people around you, whatever your business is, who's watching this, there are colleagues of yours, they're peers who are doing things in certain ways, and it might be causing you to question yourself. Like, wow, well, they're doing that, and I should do that. So we call that in the book compare and despair. And so we start to look around. And, by the way, just for the 2 of us to be clear, this is 35 chapters, and we're touching on maybe 3. So if you're liking, those of you watching what you're hearing, you've got a lot more good in the book. What the outside does to us is we often lose sight of really what rings true for our own lives. Everyone's got their own internal makeup. You're at a certain place in your life. We start to compare ourselves with people who are 20 years old or 20 years younger. They're at a different place in their life. They have different needs. They have different drives. They have different financial resources. They have different backgrounds. And so the mistake we make is to go without. And the section of the book that you and I are talking about here is the begin from within. So rather than look at what everyone else is doing to find our next step, say, wait a second. Let me begin from within and see what's the right next step for me, given where I am in my life. And that, by the way, is why the book is written as a guide. You can come back to it and ask it next week or next year, because you'll be at a different place in your life. And these questions will go right to your soul no matter where you are. So like I said, we have 24-year-olds, 23-year-olds out of college. I have an 80-year-old who wrote me and said, this is the perfect book for this final phase of my life. Because now he's in a different place. So he's got to say, begin from within, what's right for me with the time that I have.
You talk about ideas and vulnerability. And when I hear you speaking about coming from within, and one of the things that at least me as a coach and as a consultant that I see a lot of people struggling sometimes with is being vulnerable, especially now when the world has changed so much over these last 2 years. So many changes are going on. The aspect of honoring the ideas, or cherishing their ideas and being vulnerable is like, I don't know if I want to go there. And you bring it in a very simple, in a very caring and empathetic way. So let's talk a little bit about ideas and vulnerability, because you bring it out in a very subtle way where it's like, just trust it. Trust your instincts.
Right. Well, part of what you need for that is the right community, and one of the things that you remember in the book that I talk about is, be careful who you share those early ideas with, because they can easily get dented, damaged, or destroyed. And that could be from even a family member who means well, but says something that hurts you or makes you shrink back. And so, as you know, because you're in our community, we have this extraordinary group we're at the beginning of the risk forward movement here, because the book just launched when we're recording this. It's been less than a month, and it's out in thousands of people's hands, homes, and hearts. And so, and now, as you know, people are, and you've seen this in our group, people are like, I'm buying 3 more copies. I'm buying 10 more copies. I'm getting them for my whole team. And so it's going out. It's in this exponential factor right now. So we're here at the beginning. Anyone who's getting it now is at the beginning. It's exciting. But what I'm intentionally doing is creating a safe environment where people can start to share ideas. And that's starting to come a little bit down the line from now. And it's what we do in Rock the Room. Like, people, when they first come to our live programs, they think, I'm not going to get up in front of anyone. And within a day and a half, because I set these very specific pieces in place, they're like, I'll volunteer, I'll get up there. And they're so happy because they feel safe. And when you feel safe, and this goes back to the whole style of the book, it's amazing what comes out, because people feel free to express themselves. And you saw this in the interview that I did, for those of you who are fresh to who I am, a few years ago, I produced a documentary film about the Muppets. And it was specifically about Jim Henson's leadership and the culture he created that led to such legendary work. And part of that culture was risk-taking. And part of what made people take risks is the sense of safety, that they would not have recrimination or punishment if they suggested something not smart. And what we need to do with our kids and our colleagues and our team members is create that kind of safe environment so people feel free to try stuff out. Otherwise, innovation gets held in. And the book has a few specific strategies. We won't give them away, but how you, whether you're with your team or with your colleagues, can just share an idea and always feel protected.
Many years ago, and I imagine you already know this man very well, his name is Dr. Wayne Dyer. He wrote for me one of the books about intention, which I love, which is The Power of Intention. And it really took me on a journey of seeing intention through a very spiritual lens, more than an earth lens that I had seen it for many, many years. And when I read what you wrote about instincts and intuition, it really took me on, you're seeing it as a gift, you're seeing it something then bigger than, and you're seeing it also through a lens of, let's just be careful, but trust it, trust yourself.
Yeah.
What can you talk about instincts and intuition? Because I see that you bring in a lot of, I don't know, let's want to call it spirituality into the mix.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and instincts can go from the range of spirituality to the range of the practical, where you just said, I think we should do blue, because your instincts tell you to do blue instead of red, or, one idea versus another. And that comes also from experience. Like, when someone who's been in a particular field, has an expertise in a field, has an instinct, it is often built out of their toolbox of all the experiences they've had. And so I'm partly talking about the intuition that comes from who knows where, those wisps of ideas. They're in the book in different forms, and how to harness that. But I'm also talking about, if you have an inclination, it's probably based on maybe not identifiable at the moment, but certainly identifiable over time reasons. And those are worth honoring. And what happens is we have this impulse to speak up or to say something we're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, or maybe they won't think that's smart. And so a lot of hidden genius, which is part of the subtitle, Unlock Your Hidden Genius, a lot of hidden genius stays hidden. And my book is all about unlocking it and expressing it. And again, this is not woo-woo, rainbows and unicorns. Like, I have worked with the top executives at the most financially savvy companies in the world. And I've watched this at play. And I've seen it with the entrepreneurs that you and I both know. I'm in the Speaker Hall of Fame. I am not making this stuff up, and I'm not bragging. I'm just saying what I'm sharing here is crystallized knowledge from decades of work with people around the world. But it's my own interpretation. It's not like I've stolen it. It's more just I thought, how can I take everything I've learned, and not everything, but the risk forward piece of it, and bring it to people in an accessible, fun, easy guidebook. And there it is.
You and I have a friend in common, which is Randy Gage. And Randy says, I'm always intrigued by a book that questions the premise. And there's a part of your book that questions 5 specific premises, which is what you call the 5 myths: the myths of purpose, of goals, of focus, of followers, and speed. And for a lot of people, if you look around nowadays and you look everywhere on the data sphere, that's what they're selling all the time. No, you got to have a purpose. You got to have goals. You got to be focused. You got to have followers. You got to be quick. And you really confront them in a very gentle, but very clear and concise way. What can you talk about? Because to me, I'd say, Randy, I imagine he's going to be looking here and saying, okay, this questions the premise. This gets me, besides him knowing you and knowing the value of your work, but knowing Randy the way, at least a little bit of what he thinks, he says, what questions the premise? And here I see that you're questioning the premise in a very gentle, but very precise way. What can you talk about these 5 myths?
Well, I'll talk first about the entire premise behind the book that I question, which is the premise that clarity is where you begin. And as I say in the book, clarity is not the place from which we begin. I mean, sometimes we get a flash, but 95% of the time, we're in that fog. You know, you're looking for a new home and you're not sure. You're trying to find who to date and you're not sure. You're trying to figure out your next business model and you're looking around. You're trying to figure out how to make your way through a creative project, or you're looking for who to hire. I mean, we're usually in the fog. And as we move forward, we get clearer. And then we fix that, and then we're in the fog because we have another issue, another problem, and then we move forward. So I'm inverting the whole assumption, because people say, okay, start clear. You got to be clear first. And when people feel like they're not clear, they stop. They think, well, I'm not clear. If I'm not clear, I'm screwed. I better not start. And I'm inverting that and saying, no, clarity is the place you get to, and risk forward is how you get there.
Okay.
So then at the end of the book, I share 5 myths, which I won't go into because we have literally 30 seconds left to wrap up our interview. I know. But they're each a page long, they're thought-provoking, and they will give you, the reader, peace. They will free you, and they will actually surprisingly lead you to what they're intended to do. Because as I said earlier, this book never says, go for your dreams, go for it. But what's happening is people are going for it as a result, because I give them the permission.
One last question. I had 2, but let me at least go for 1. You talk about something beautiful, and you make a beautiful story at the end of the book, and I don't want to give it away, about your noble intent. And I think that's something that really touched my heart. It really moved me. I lost my mother almost 3 years ago, and I know what it is to lose a loved one. And I was there in New York also when you had that insight, when your life changed 9/11. I was getting on a plane at 8:12 in the morning, an American Airlines flight. I was in New York City covering Michael Jackson's 30th anniversary as a solo artist. I was going to cover the Latin Grammys in LA, and my plane got diverted to Indianapolis for 4 days. It wasn't one of the chosen ones. So I was leaving New York City. The day your life changed, I got a wake-up call. And your noble intent, it moved me to tears. And what do you want to tell people to close this interview about noble intent?
Well, in each of you is something extraordinary that we have not seen before. Risk Forward is helping you get it out, and that behind that, with the purity of it, that thing that lights you up, that pulls you forward, that is partly your noble intent. And so to follow that, there's more about it. I won't rush it. And by the way, all of what I'm saying here is not designed to be coy and hold things back. It's really more, the book is a little like going to a movie. It's an experience, and it takes you through different moments, and we're trying not to ruin it for you, so that when you read the book, you can experience it fresh for the first time. And when you get to the end, you'll see about your noble intent, and what drives you.
So Victoria, I know, just to let people know, they could find you at victorialabalme.com, at riskforward.com, where they could buy the book. Also, it's available on Amazon. I bought it on Amazon too. What would you like to say to just close out? And thank you very much for being so generous with your time, because I know you have a group to meet. Which
Yes, I do. I do. But
so what would you like
for,
to say to close out this interview?
yeah, well, very, very important for everyone. We do have a community which, once you buy a book, you're welcome to join. It's free to join the bigger community. And don't miss out, because you'll meet other people that are in the Risk Forward process that you can find out more about at riskforward.com. So wherever you get your book, at your bookstore, on Barnes & Noble, at Amazon, you name it, come back to riskforward.com, because we have a special way to join the community there. So that's the first thing I would say. And that's the easiest way. My name is hard to spell, but it's here, victorialabalme.com. We'll put a link, I'm sure. And this is the book, Risk Forward. You can find me there. To each of you, you have hidden genius in you. Trust that and go out there, show the world who you are, and risk forward.
Victoria, thank you very much. I'm so honored to have been spoken to you. Thank you for being so generous for your time. And obviously, I will continue to follow your work. You will see me around. I will continue to follow you. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.